Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States Most Wanted Cybercriminal, now good guy, and host of The Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode number 55, the Patriot Act 2.0, sending you to Guantanamo. Yeah, hey, there's nothing funny about that, but that is the world we live in when we come back. Okay, so we are back to the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode number 55, the Patriot Act 2.0, sending you, yes, you, dear viewer, to Guantanamo. And yeah, hey, we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Before we do that, got to talk about some show changes. Got to do a little Q&A. Hell, I might even rant a little bit throughout the episode. Not that I ever do that anyway. But moving right along. So show changes. Look, this show's format, the Brett Johnson Show, not going to change. Every now and then I'm going to, I may bring in a guest. We'll talk about something. We'll maybe rant about something, what have you. My little puppet guy, where are you, puppet guy? I am still learning how to use this guy right here. And he'll get used to it at some freaking point. And at some point, he'll become a regular guest, co-host, whatever you want to call it. But so that's the Brett Johnson Show. You know, it ranges anywhere from 50 minutes up to an hour and a half, depending on how many topics I want to cover. Today, we've got a few topics to cover. I don't anticipate this show going over an hour. That being said, there's other things that I want to bitch, moan, and complain about and educate about as well. So next week, we are launching Cybercrime 101, strictly a YouTube channel. It's going to be 10 to 15 minute videos that discusses the different types of crime that's going on out there. So, you know, and educates about identity theft, identity protection, does all that kind of stuff in 10 to 15 minute increments. Because let's be honest, some people just watch the Brett Johnson Show to learn about crime and how to stop it and protect themselves, and maybe even how to do it. And they're not really interested in all the other mumbo jumbo that I'm putting out there. So I'm going to satisfy that hunger, if there is a hunger. I guess we'll find out. So we're doing that. I'm also represented these days. I'm working with Shorty Media. So you're going to see differences in thumbnails. We're going to do some YouTube shorts, some TikTok shorts, things like that. And it's because, hey, I don't know what the hell I'm doing with that. So partnered with James Cobb over at Shorty Media, and he is handling all that for me. He's doing an outstanding job. If you guys are thinking about a YouTube channel, anything else like that, he handles the SEO, handles the thumbnails, he'll upload it. He does a great job. And at some point, he may even make some money from me. No, he's making money right now. But hey, he's a good guy. It's a good company. So I thought I'd give them a plug on that. So the first show change, of course, is Cybercrime 101. That's going to launch this next week. I'm going to launch it with 8 to 9 videos, try to come out with 2 videos a week, 10 to 15 minutes talking about some aspect of fraud, online crime, how to protect yourself, things like that. Educate, entertain, enlighten, have some fun doing it. So that's the first one. The second one, well, let me show you what the second one is that we've got coming up. So the second one is hold on here just a second while I pull this thing up. All right. So here we go. You're seeing it on screen right now. Prison Politics. That is a brand new show. That is not Prison Politics right there. So that is a brand new show that we've got coming up. Let's pull that screen up again so that everyone can see. Instead of my pretty face sitting there screaming at the screen, everyone can see what the hell I'm talking about. All right, so let's pull this up one more time, Brady. So this is Prison Politics. It's a brand new show that we're going to be launching in 5 to 6 weeks. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in former felons, maybe even current felons. I don't really give a shit if they're current or former as long as they've been to prison. You want to be on the show? The prerequisite is you've had to have served time. That's the prerequisite. I don't really give a shit about anything else. I just want to make sure you serve time. And the reason why is because I really believe that the politics of prison, the way prisons operate, you know, you've got the shot callers, you've got the gangs that operate, you've got the how things are segregated in prison as well. I do believe that from what someone experiences in prison, it absolutely gives them an insight to today's real world politics. So we're going to talk about, they'll come in, they'll introduce themselves, they'll tell just a small amount of their story. It's not going to be like some of these other shows where the entire show is them telling their life story. No, we ain't going to do that shit. We're not. We're going to come in, they're going to give a short bio. We're going to talk about the politics of prison for a while. Then we're going to move over into some real shit. And I'm talking about the stuff that gets one banned on YouTube. So I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that yet. But, we're going to talk about how people view both sides of the political equation, how the views of LGBTQ, woke environment, of far left or left and right wing extremism, of Trump, of DeSantis, of Newsom, of Biden. We're going to talk about that. And the hope is that through these discussions, that we have some fun. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's going to be some people that absolutely are fucknut crazy, that don't know what the hell they're talking about, but at least it'll be fun to listen to them. But we're going to have some people that actually do have some nice insights. And I think the idea is just to give people a voice and maybe learn something in the process. Okay, so that's going to launch in 5 to 6 weeks. We're going to launch that again with 8 to 9 episodes, and those episodes will be a longer format episode. I'm trying to determine right now whether they're going to be a 45-minute or more of a 90-minute episode, and it's probably going to be the latter. So, but I'll announce it, and we'll have more news coming up. I wanted to share the logo because I have this cartoonist. He did this work for me behind me, but I have this cartoonist that anything cartoon. He works for me all the time. I've worked with him for 6 years or longer. So I worked with him for a long time. He's a great guy. And anything cartoon is the name of it. But anymore, I just come up with an idea of something, and I send him the name or the domain, and he starts to work, and he sends me, he's like, what do you think about this? So he sent me the precursor of the logo that I just showed you. And I was like, I like it. There needs to be some changes. So I put it up on my Twitter feed, and I was like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And I got some really good feedback, and it resulted in the final product that you see there. I'm very happy with that. And I really hope the show is going to be successful. Now, what I mean by successful, I want to be honest with you. I don't make shit on the Brett Johnson Show. The Brett Johnson Show is something for me to get out and talk about, cybercrime, cybersecurity, the issues on that front for the day, but also help me along with my journey of trying to become a better person, a healthy person. So I don't really profit. I don't look to really profit from this show. I am actually really hoping that both the Cybercrime 101 and the Prison Politics Show, I hope they do really well and come up with some profit. All right. So we'll see. I would like to get to the point. I'm there in many fronts. I'm the guy that I'm not afraid to tell someone to fuck off. I am not. But usually you need what's called fuck you money to be able to do that. And I do not have fuck you money. So sometimes I tell people to do that, and it hurts my bottom line. I would like to get to the point where I'm able to talk freely without fear of financial consequence and just say this shit. I'm going to say it anyway, but I would like to not have to do it and then worry about, well, how am I going to put diapers on the babies? Just saying, just throw that out there, $8 a dozen eggs. You got to worry about shit like that every now and then. So that being said, that's just show changes. So let's move over into some Q&A. And look, here's the thing. I didn't have time to, I usually have all the questions pulled up from YouTube, from LinkedIn, from Twitter, through email, things like that as well. And I read the questions directly. I didn't really have time to do that today because today is the day the show releases, and I'm trying to get this shit out. And you know how I am. I like to talk a lot. So I made some quick notes on everything. The first is a follow-up on Frank Abagnale. I did episode 53, talking about Frank Abagnale, talking about how the stories of Catch Me If You Can, not true at all, very embellished, both by Frank, the writer, the director, producers, everything else across the board over the years. Alan Logan put out a book that called Frank, hey, you're lying about everything. And yeah, he pretty much was. Javier Levere does the Pretend podcast. He did a fascinating podcast as well about Frank Abagnale and some of the lies that were told. And what I'm talking about now is I'm on LinkedIn. I've talked with Javier. I think he's an outstanding individual. Like the guy a lot. I'm actually sharing the stage with him at the same conference. I'm speaking at the same conference with him in Columbus, Ohio in May. So I'll get to meet the gentleman at that point. And I think Javier does a great job. So there was on LinkedIn, there was someone who posted they called it an ambush interview of Frank Abagnale talking about, they got him at a conference coming out and they started hitting him with all this stuff from the pretend podcast. Well, you didn't do this. Well, you didn't do this. Well, have you paid back your victims? Well, have you done this? Have you done this? And I have been on the receiving side, just in one instance, of a press junket or whatever you want to call it, an interview that its purpose was to hammer me, to try to if you want to call it get me canceled or whatever. I was on the receiving side of that. It was a Slate podcast, and it was the weirdest thing in the world. I mean, I did the podcast, and you guys have seen me do other podcasts. I'm pretty much the same guy on every one. But so I did this Slate podcast. It's been 5 years ago, maybe longer than that. And what happened was, as the podcast is beginning, I was very naive about interviewing press back then. I was used to being in the press from the bad guy point of view, not from, turning my life around and being this security consultant now. So, I didn't realize at the time that the people who were running this podcast for Slate, they had an agenda. So out of the gate, one of the questions was, what do you think about how do you feel about race and how that played into your conviction? And I'm like, shit, there wasn't any. So that kind of upset them. So then they went off and they tried to find their own story. And their own story was basically coming back and hammering Brett Johnson. You shouldn't listen to him. You shouldn't trust him. He's a criminal, blah, 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 blah. That's fine if you want to do that. I wish they would have told me before. I would have still done the interview, but it would have been a little bit different. We would have talked about some other stuff as well. What was really interesting is before they, as they were doing the editing and the show and everything, one of the hosts of that podcast calls me up one day and he sends me an email. He sends me an email. He's like, sends me a snapshot in this article. He's like, is this your co-conspirator? And I looked at it, and the guy's name was Eric McFall. And I had forgotten all about Eric. I really had. And I responded. I picked up the phone. I called this guy, and I was like, hey, yeah, that's my co-conspirator. And you could tell it burst his bubble. And the reason it burst his bubble is because Eric was African-American. And I was, in my case and everything, what had happened was Eric had no idea. I mean, he knew I was a criminal, but he didn't know that I was, it wasn't even that I was using him. Eric kept pestering me. Is there anything you could do or shoot my way that I can make some money? I was like, yeah, man. And I set him up with a job. I was like, hey, go to the California Death Index, find me a couple of 200 names of people I need you to run through the US Death Index and everything. And I didn't explain what it was or anything else like that. Well, he got indicted for that. And I don't even know if he served any time. But this article that this guy sent me, Eric had just been arrested again, and he had been arrested for dealing drugs, credit card theft, had weapons, everything else. And I don't remember Eric as being that guy. And I'm not quite sure if me getting him arrested to begin with, because he had never been in any trouble at all before he met me. I'm not quite sure if my involvement with him is what led him down that path. I often worry about that now. Back then, it was obvious that the Slate interviewer was not interested in that, and that was going against their agenda. So they put out this other show. And the reason I know we're talking about Frank, but this ambush video was hitting Frank with that. And I got to be honest, that it's on YouTube. I'll put a link to it up as well in the show notes. But Frank's response to the interview, it really caused me to think about things. And what Frank said, he made a point at one point during this. It's a very short interview. He made a point. He's like, look, he said, I would hope that people would judge me based on how I've lived my life the past several decades instead of what I did 50 years ago. And that, by God, that really resonated with me. I mean, it truly did. And I made a point about that because I've done the same thing. I mean, I was much longer coming to God, so to speak, than Frank Abagnale was. Frank Abagnale committed crime up through his mid 20s, mid to late 20s. And then he started to reform. I was 40 before I got to that same point. And I would hope that by the time my life is over, Frank Abagnale is 75, I am 53. I would hope by the time I am winding things down that people would look at my life and judge me, based on the good that I've tried to do. And I do try to do that. And what I made the point of, I made the point on my show. I've made the same statements on LinkedIn as well, that yes, Frank Abagnale absolutely lied about his criminal past. He absolutely embellished. He let that go on. He was not a good guy. And some of it was not his fault. Some of it got past him because of, producers and press people and security companies that worked with him. They pumped that stuff up too. I don't lie about my past, but sometimes a security company will come in and they'll pump things up. And I'm like, okay. So I would hope that people would look at how your life has, you've done bad, but you've also done good. And then, judge you based on that. Is what I would hope. I would also hope that we'd understand finally that, hey, don't judge each other, because by God, I promise at some point you live in a glass house too, and there's something you could be judged on. People tend to forget that. So I just wanted to mention that about Mr. Abagnale, that I do believe the man has done some good, even though that lies were absolutely told. So moving right along. That being said, during these same discussions, it always pops up at some point, actually 3 to 4 times a year. There's something that pops up about, hey, you're a speaker, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, I think I am. And the response is, I get some of these people coming in trying to book me for speeches and what have you. And there's always this statement of, well, we don't have a budget. And I'm like, okay, well, I do some free work. I do free work for law enforcement, for universities and schools, for some nonprofits. I absolutely do some free work. But the point is, and the reason I'm bringing this up, the way that I make my living is through speaking. Now, I do some consulting on the side, but the way that I make my living is through speaking. And there's been a couple of conferences this year that, they signed me on last year. Like there's this one huge ass conference. And when I was told about it early last year, I was not told that it was going to be this massive conference. So there was this huge ass conference in New York, and they asked me, the gentleman running it, they were like, hey, will you come in and keynote? We're trying to build our brand up to where we're actually profitable and making money. I was like, hey, dude, absolutely. I like you guys. I'll come in and do that. So they started advertising me for this presentation, for this conference as a keynote, along with some other keynotes. And I start looking at the materials, and it turns out they're charging, over $1,500 a ticket to attend the conference. And I'm like, well, shit, if you could charge somebody $1,500 plus for a ticket, you can goddamn sure pay Brett Johnson to come and speak. So we had that conversation, and what happens is, I hate to pick on them personally, but what happens is typically you'll have somebody that they don't want to pay you, yet they're making money, and they try to feed you this bullshit line of, hey, would you do it just for the exposure? And I'm like, the exposure? Shit, people know who I am already. I don't need the exposure. And I got to be honest with you, that whole line, well, you're going to be in front of a whole lot of people, a lot of decision makers, and you're going to get a lot of leads out of that. Let me tell anybody that's doing the speaking gig, that's just getting started, anytime you hear that line, it is a line of shit. That is not true at all. All right. That's a line they give you to try to convince you that it's going to be worth it for you to come in and for free and speak. So no. And the reason I'm saying this is, and my wife was commenting on it, my agent has commented on it. The thing is they're not doing this for free. So why should the speaker? If I am bringing value, or if any speaker is bringing value to a venue, to a conference or anything else, and they're using that name to generate ticket sales, to generate leads, what have you, if they're not doing it for free, why should you? So that's a note to any speaker that's out there. On a felon front, on a former criminal front, there was a gentleman that I ended up blocking his ass on LinkedIn over the past few days, but he was going off about how, Criminals should not make money, should not be paid to speak. It's wrong. It's wrong. Well, here's the thing, dude. Here's the thing. You're going people who get out of prison. We have very few avenues with which to make a legal living, because when you leave prison with the exact same tools you go in with. There's very little rehab in prison, and trying to get a job out of prison is very difficult. You typically have to start your own business and then go from there. That's one of the things I tell everyone is, hey, you want to know how you survive after prison? You find a business that you can do yourself. That way you don't have to worry about trying to find employment or anything else. That's the way things work in the United States. What I do is I speak, I consult, I raise awareness, I do stuff like that. So I absolutely speak. Now, this guy was taking affront to that, and he was arguing, oh, yeah, you shouldn't pay for that. You should do this stuff for free. And I'm like, okay, I do stuff for free. But at the same time, if someone's charging a couple of $1,000s a ticket, or using, my information, my knowledge that I've got to bring value to their venue, guess what? Everyone needs to be paid at the end of the day. And it's not like I'm an asshole with that. I typically work within whatever budget a venue has, typically. All right. So I just wanted to share that this idea that once someone serves their time, that they still need to be punished financially, socially, what have you. I disagree with that. And I will grant you that a lot of people who get out of prison, they have not changed their mindset. They have not, chose to try to do the right thing. Most people do. Most people get out of prison and they really want to do the right thing. They really think that they can. And unfortunately, you're released from prison with the exact same tools you go in with. And if you're not fortunate enough to have that support group, that safety net of individuals, friends, family members, and associates that are willing to help you, the chances of you failing pretty high. I was very fortunate. I had that. I was very fortunate. I had people that reached out in the cybersecurity industry on law enforcement side, my family members as well. And they really gave me that opportunity to turn my life around. And so I'm fortunate that most people are not that fortunate. And so, what I would say is, if a former felon is coming on and the only thing he's doing is bragging for an hour about his crimes. And I was at a conference with a gentleman in Riyadh in December of 22, where this guy did this. The only thing he did for 45 minutes was brag about how much crime he committed and was lying about what he did, which I still don't understand why anyone would lie about a criminal history and say, hey, I was actually a worse criminal than that. I don't get it, but it happens. And he's not the only one. This UK, the top fraudster in the UK, he's not the only one that lies about all this shit. There's a guy out in Las Vegas that I mentioned in episode 53 that had told me at one point, oh, yeah, I was hooked in with the Mexican cartels. Well, no, dude, you weren't. Because you told me later you weren't. So you were lying about stuff. And I don't get that. I really don't. But this show is not about that. So let's move on. My point is, hey, anybody who's on the speaking circuit, if you're a speaker, if you're a former criminal or not, do not let these conferences and webinars and things like that feed you a BS line of, well, you're going to get exposure. Well, we don't have a budget. You need to consider this. Are you getting paid? Are you doing this for free? If the answer is no, they're not, then why are you doing it for free? So please just bear that in mind. I just wanted to rant. I told you this show was going to be about ranting a little bit. All right, moving right along. On LinkedIn and via email, this individual, they requested that I hide their identity, that I even change their gender, so I'm going to refer to them as they and them. So they reached out to me. See, I'm using their pronoun like I said I would. So they reached out to me and they said, hey, we watched your show on TikTok and you were mentioning about how the data that's gathered could be used to identify military members, their spouses, troop movements, intel people, things like that. Could you go more into that? And could you also give advice on how that kind of stuff could be circumvented, defeated? I mentioned it on the TikTok episode number 54. There's also another episode in the Brett Johnson library that talks about the problems with TikTok. Think about the data that's coming in through TikTok, and that data is enough. You get device information, you get the other devices that are in the area of that one user, all right, because you're looking at IP, you're looking at location access. You know, when you sign on to an app and it says, can we get your location? And hopefully you're saying no, but most people will say yes while using the app. Okay, so the problem with TikTok and Facebook and a lot of social media is that even though you're agreeing to that and think that, you know, either I'm not sharing location or I'm only sharing location in certain instances, Facebook has shown that no, you're actually sharing location throughout. We're able to track you by using the other data and information that's coming in. We're able to track your movements completely throughout. And TikTok's no different than that. So you're able to see all the devices that are in a specific area. And there's a reason that governments, you know, the military and intel agencies and government offices have started to ban TikTok on those devices, because at that point you're able to see who's in the same office, where they're at, where they're going, what they're looking at, things like that. And as you know, we're very good when we see a TikTok short or a Facebook post or a YouTube post or something like that. We like to share it with our friends. So that's a lot of the information that's gathered is device information, IP information, where you are. That's the geolocation information. It's what you're doing, what you're looking at, who's in that circle, everything else. So you can start to extrapolate based on what they're looking at, who's looking at it. You can start to extrapolate things like you can absolutely tell if someone is not very faithful to their spouse by what they're looking at, who they're with. So you can see if think about the geolocation, if someone is cheating on their spouse, that social media company knows when they're going to a hotel and who they're in the hotel with if both devices have the same app installed on them. So you can absolutely see things like that. For example, your smartwatch, they don't tell you this, but your smartwatch knows when you're getting, jiggly with it, when you're shaking hands with the unemployment, when you're bopping the dolphin under the big tent, when you're aiding and abetting a known felon, otherwise known as when you're masturbating. Your smartphone absolutely knows that. It doesn't tell you it knows that, but it knows that that wrist movement is something special, and it knows exactly what that is. Social media knows these types of things too. So, and I think we've understood that for a while when we're looking at Facebook, but when you're looking at something like TikTok, where they've got a law, the Chinese government has a law saying, hey, we get any data that we want from your platform. So if you're looking at a government doing that, the government's able to look at, talking about a foreign government here, is able to look at enough data to try to determine who the troops are, what their movements are, who the spouses are, potential deployments, things like that across the board. So you think about a soldier that comes in and tells his or her spouse that, hey, I'm going to be deployed. We're going to Ukraine. All right. So what's the spouse do at this point? The spouse at this point goes and starts researching problems in Ukraine. Well, TikTok's a pretty good search engine. So they're going to pull up some Ukraine videos. TikTok's registering that. Now, TikTok's already determined that it's a military family. There's a reason that this individual is starting to search for Ukraine. So you look at the keywords, things like that, and you're able to extrapolate, well, there's a potential of this soldier going or being deployed to the Ukraine. Then you start looking at that soldier, who's in his circle or her circle, who's in that circle. What are they looking at? What are their spouses looking at? And then you're able to determine what's going on. You could even get it to the point of knowing when they're going to be deployed. That's how much information is being gathered at that point. It's very, very effective. It's so effective that, and make no mistake, the United States government does it too. We've already seen instances of the U.S. government offices buying data from social media companies. So it's not just the Chinese that's doing this shit. The U.S. has been doing this for a while, and you can bet your ass the U.S. also does it against other countries where U.S. social media is being used there. The government agencies are absolutely getting data from those citizens as well. All right, so this is what happens. This is exactly what happens, and this is what it's leading into today's episode of the Patriot Act 2.0. The question that this individual asked me, that they asked me, was, not only could you go into it a little bit more, which I think I have, but also, how could you circumvent something like that? So if you know that that's going on, if you know that that type of data can be garnered from social media, from what you're doing, how do you handle that? Well, the first way you handle it is if you're a government office, if you're the military or an agency, you say, hey, don't use friggin' TikTok or don't use this social media at all. So you put limits on it. You start to get rid of it, okay? The other thing that you can do is you can start to dilute that data. You can start to throw out things that are false, these false positives, in order to skew or manipulate. If you know someone's looking at you, you start to skew that. You send out false flags all the time or fake news all the time. And then hopefully that gets to the point where this government that's looking at things cannot really get any useful information. And you can do that with bots. You can do it with human beings. You can do any number of things. If you know someone's looking at you, you start throwing out a bunch of fake bullshit. And I am absolutely positive that that is happening. And we're going to talk more. The result of all this stuff, that we're talking about with TikTok and everything, is this Restrict Act, which is the subject of today's show. And I'm going to talk about a couple more things before we get over to that. Today is Tuesday, April 4th. Today is the Trump Arraignment Day. And I've got some predictions on that. My predictions are, first and foremost, we will see Lindsey Graham whining. We may see some CNN host masturbating live on the air. We'll see Donald Trump compare himself to Jesus. We'll see Biden and company use this as a distraction against their horrible, horrible, horrible presidency and the way they're running the country right now. And we'll probably see the rest of the world pointing at the United States and laughing at us. Trump is indicted today. Last night on Drudge Report, they were saying it could be 34 felonies that he's been indicted for. Felonies around paying a porn star to keep her mouth shut. And yes, I know most people do not pay porn stars to keep their mouth shut, but open. This, however, is a little different. So, she was paid, Stormy Daniels was paid, $150K or some shit like that to keep her mouth shut. And because of that, he's being indicted. Something that happened over 7 years ago. That is a misdemeanor that the federal government declined to prosecute him on, said there was no case of that whatsoever. This DA in New York has got a hard-on for Trump because why? Well, it's all political. Let's be honest, it's political. Now, does that mean that, hey, he didn't do wrong? Maybe not. So we'll see. But it's absolutely politically motivated and driven. And I think because of that, a lot of people are seeing that right now. And I think we're going to see Donald Trump's, it appeared that his base was fragmenting. And I think that this does not fragment Donald Trump's base at all. I think this more solidifies his base and brings in some of those people that were on the fringes that were like, I don't like Donald Trump, but, I hate Joe Biden, or vice versa. I think it brings in some new members to the Trump base. So it's going to be interesting whether Trump goes to jail, which I don't think he will, or he gets reelected as president, which, shit, I don't know if he will or not. We'll see in a couple of years, right? So moving right along, someone asked me about China. So China, it looks like China is building a coalition in order to de-dollarize the dollar. The United States dollar is basically the business currency worldwide. China recently has been building a coalition with Russia, with Saudi Arabia, things like that, and they're tired of the United States having that type of control. So is that an issue? Oh, yeah, that's a big issue because China has one hell of an economy, and when they flex, they tend to make ripples. So I would, the concern, of course, is from a U.S. point of view and from all those allies in the U.S. of, well, shit, what happens if China comes on and just kind of takes over everything? And I think it's a possibility. I don't like it. I think it hurts the United States economy. It hurts the Western economies as well. But, the problem is we as the United States, we've been very good, and Western countries have been very good about hurting the economies of some of these third and second world countries as well. So what do you do? I don't know. I think that I think times are not really good worldwide for most of anyone right now. With that being said, it's time to get on with the meat of the show, the Patriot Act 2.0, sending you to Guantanamo when we come back. All right, so we are back to the Brett Johnson Show, the meat of today's episode number 55, the Patriot Act 2.0, sending you to Guantanamo. And yes, I'm not. Hey, the thing is I am not embellishing. I am not using hyperbole. I'm not lying. I'm just telling this shit the way it is, because as things continue in the United States, we continue to have our liberties stripped away. This freedom of speech, freedom of information bullshit that we think we've got in the United States, it is an illusion. It is absolutely an illusion. Make no mistake about that. You know, our choices continue to deteriorate every single day, but meanwhile, we're able to go to Starbucks and get 50 different types or flavors of coffee. Choice is an illusion, and the Restrict Act, what I'm calling the Patriot Act 2.0, that is absolutely another thing that the United States government and the powers that be are using to, at the detriment of the American people. Before I get started on that, what I want to mention is laws that are put on the books. They are ostensibly written to target one specific type of people. For example, conspiracy laws. When you're in the federal justice system, to prosecute people under conspiracy, those laws were made to target the higher-ups of drug organizations because they really could not be arrested with anything. You'd have the higher-ups that were out there, and they would have the people, the trap stars. So trap people are people that are on the corner of, streets slinging dope all the time. Those were the people that had the dope on them. So, law enforcement would go and arrest those individuals, and they would say, hey, where'd you get your dope? And of course, the people would either keep their mouths shut or they would tell, hey, this guy gave it to me. Well, then they had no evidence on that guy. There was no real drugs to be found. They'd go and they'd search this guy, the head of the drug organization. They'd search him, nothing found at all. So it was very hard to prosecute. So they put these conspiracy laws into place so that, hey, we can now prosecute the higher-ups of drug organizations. However, that's not the way the conspiracy law is used in the federal system. Most people who are charged with conspiracy are simply drug addicts who, because of their addiction, they started to sell drugs themselves in order to support their habit, and then they get charged with conspiracy and sent to prison for 5 to 20 years. That's the way this actually happens. I'll walk you through it. Okay. So what actually happens is, I'll use me as an example. Let's say that Brett Johnson is a drug dealer, not only a drug dealer, but the head of the Brett Johnson cartel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my drugs, or let's not even use that as an example. That's a bad example. Let's say that Brett Johnson's a drug addict, that I like my crack cocaine. And I use crack cocaine so much that I either have to steal to get money to pay for my habit, or I have to sell some drugs on the side in order to support my habit. So what happens is I'm a drug addict. I start selling some drugs, and Joe comes along, and Joe's like, hey, man, you got anything you'll sell me, man? And I'm like, yeah, man, I'll sell you a teeny, a tenner or whatever. So I sell him a little bit of that. So he starts buying some on the side from me so I can support my habit too. Now he gets picked up by law enforcement. Law enforcement gets him, and they find, he's got some stolen shit in his car. He's got, the drugs in his car, all this other stuff. And they say, where'd you get your drugs? And he's like, well, I ain't going to tell you. And they're like, well, you're going to tell us, or we're going to give you 10 years in prison. Where'd you get your drugs? So he says, I got them from Brett Johnson. How much did you get from Brett Johnson? Well, I just got this little tenner, man. That's all I got. And they're like, well, shit, that's not, and they even say it out loud in front of him. Well, shit, that's not enough. That ain't going to get you no time off. So he's like, well, I mean, I just got a tenner now, but, I've been buying like 3 ounces a week from him for a year. So like, you've been buying 3 ounces a week. And they're like, yeah, 3 ounces a week. Like, oh, shit, that's 150 ounces. That's a lot of dope. So that's one person that's willing to say that they bought this amount of drugs from me. So then they arrest somebody else. And they ask him, hey, have you heard of Brett Johnson? Oh, yeah, I've heard of Brett Johnson. What about him, man? Did you ever buy anything off of him? He's like, do I need to have bought anything off of him? And I was like, well, it would help your case if you had. Well, yeah, man, I bought a couple of keys. I buy usually about a key a year off of him. So that gets you 2 keys. All right. 2 keys, 2.2 pounds. Or I'm sorry, 2.2 pounds per key. So 4.4 pounds of dope at that point. Now, even though there's no dope at all right, because 2 people have said that I sold them drugs, that allows the federal government to prosecute me for conspiracy and to convict me for conspiracy, even though there may not be any drugs at all that were found. That's what's called ghost dope in the federal system. Now, I use that as an example because the conspiracy laws were actually put into place in order to prosecute the higher-ups. But once laws are on the books, prosecutors and law enforcement look to see how they can use those laws to prosecute everyone that they possibly can. Happens with conspiracy. It happened with the Patriot Act. So remember the Patriot Act back in the early 2000s as a result of 9/11. They had a bunch of terrorists come in. They hijacked some planes, ran them into some buildings, killed a lot of people, spread fear throughout the United States, got all George Bush Jr., got him a hard-on about bombing some Middle Eastern countries that didn't have a damn thing to do with those terrorists. But that's what happened. As a result of that, they came up with the Patriot Act. This, it was like 2,000 pages. Nobody in Congress that voted for it actually read the damn thing. They were just told, hey, this is going to make us safer. And what it did was it stripped a lot of liberties away from American citizens. It targeted a lot of people. That Patriot Act was put into place ostensibly to target terrorists. However, now I ran Shadow Crew back in the day. There were a couple of Shadow Crew people that were prosecuted under the Patriot Act. They were arrested in Cyprus for credit card theft, and they were prosecuted under the Patriot Act. There was a strip club that was prosecuted using the Patriot Act back in the day. Had nothing to do with terrorists, had to do with money laundering. That was part of the Patriot Act. And because it was written so broadly, it was able to be used to prosecute things that were outside of what it was supposedly meant for. Enter today's Patriot Act 2.0, the Restrict Bill. It is actually, the number of that bill is Senate Bill 686. And it's meant to give the president the power and authority to ban TikTok. Now, the people who put this bill forward are Mark Warner, a Democrat out of Virginia, and John Thune, a Republican out of South Dakota. I would call them fucking idiots, but they're not really idiots. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They've written a bill so broad in scope and range that it can really target any specific thing that they want to target. Now, there's been a few articles, and I've linked a couple of articles. I'm going to link Joseph Cox's Vice article where he talks about, you can be prosecuted now. If this bill passes, you can be prosecuted for using a VPN. You absolutely can. Hot Hardware has got a nice article that kind of breaks things down. So I'm going to have those two linked in the show notes. I'll also have the bill itself so you can read it yourself if you want to. All right. I have taken the liberty to read it, and I'm going to break it down as to what all it targets. And it targets a shitload of stuff. Reading directly from the bill itself, this is Section 3, and there's a lot of mumbo jumbo. It starts out like for Section 3, it starts out addressing information and communication technology products and services that pose undue or unacceptable risk. Section A, in general, the Secretary, in consultation with the relevant executive department and agency heads, is authorized to and shall take action to identify, deter, disrupt, prevent, prohibit, investigate, or otherwise mitigate entering into, imposing, or enforcing blah, 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 blah. See, it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And I'm saying it in my makeshift Russian accent because, hey, we are headed right there with bullshit like this. But what it says, we're getting into the meat of this is Section 3 from Senate Bill 686. Section A, sabotage or subversion of the design, integrity, manufacturing, production, distribution, installation, operation, or maintenance of information and communication technology products and services in the United States. Now, what the shit does that mean? That's where Joseph Cox is getting this VPN. If you are using something that defeats or bypasses how a cell phone works, how a website works, how a set of software works, they can prosecute you. So that's a VPN. That's exactly what a VPN does. A VPN makes sure that your ISP can't see where you're going. That's what Tor does, the onion router. When you access the dark web, Tor, the ISP can see that you're using Tor, but they can't see where you're going. If you're using what's called a privacy browser, for example. So what happens is if you go to sign into Amazon, to Bank of America, to most any website, that website does what's called browser fingerprinting. It captures 42 different unique characteristics about your browser and your specific session. Those unique identifiers are enough to identify you specifically within millions of other users to that platform. Okay. A lot of people respect, they in the United States privacy is not important, but there are some people who want privacy. So they use Tor. They use a privacy browser. So a privacy browser, while I'm using a Samsung S23, a privacy browser will spoof a different device. It will say that I'm coming in using an iPhone or a laptop. It will spoof browsers. It will make sure that this specific company, this website, is not able to track me. That's important. We should be privacy conscious about everything that we're doing and everything that we're sharing. In the United States, we're not, though, but we should be. All right. So this is saying that if you're using a privacy product like a VPN, like a SOC5 proxy, like a spoofed phone call, it could even hit things like Google Voice, depending on how you're using Google Voice. If you're using anything like this, we can target you. We can not only target you, but it comes with penalties of up to 20 years in prison or a $1 million fine. Now, the bill is written where it targets a foreign adversary. So it says, you know, if it's connected to China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, Venezuela, but it says foreign adversary. So anything that's considered a foreign adversary. This bill, I'll give you an example. So say it bans TikTok, and TikTok is horribly popular. I mean, it's really drinking the milkshake of every United States social media platform out there. Yeah, that's right. I drink TikTok saying, I drink your milkshake. And it tastes good. None of the social media platforms in the United States can compete with TikTok whatsoever. It is beating the dog shit out of them. And since they can't compete, they've given a lot of dollars to the United States government to ban its ass. And this Restrict Act helps this along. All right. But it's more than just TikTok. So say they ban TikTok. Say you've got a 12-year-old out there that really likes TikTok, or a 53-year-old that really likes the jiggling things that are on TikTok. So I want to see that. So I use a VPN that makes it look like my device is not in the United States that has banned TikTok, but it makes it look like my device is in South America someplace that has not banned TikTok. So I'm able to access TikTok. I can be prosecuted for that. Oh, yeah. I can be prosecuted for that. Now, do you think they're going to prosecute people for that? Yeah, you're goddamn right. They're going to prosecute people for that. So anything that is privacy aware, that defeats how cookies operate, say, for example, like I use an ad blocker. Does that ad blocker subvert the design of websites? Yes, it absolutely does. It absolutely. So you could be prosecuted for that. Now, Brett, you're overstating things now. It won't be done like that. You keep telling yourself that. Keep telling yourself that. And as it happens, you'll see what the shit happens to you. So it can target any number of things that subvert these things. So if you use spoofed phone calls, if you use the Tor browser, if you use privacy browsers, if you use VPNs, you can be prosecuted for this. Absolutely, you can. It goes on. Catastrophic effects on the security or resilience of the critical infrastructure or digital economy of the United States. What does that mean? Well, that's the part where they start to target cryptocurrency. That's exactly that part right there, that digital economy. Understanding that brick and mortar financial institutions in the United States, they have seen the success that crypto tokens have had, that Bitcoin's got, that all these other stable coins like Tether, all these things are experiencing right now. They've seen the profit. They've seen the success of that. And they're saying, you know, hey, if we could just shut down this shit, we could introduce our own centralized banking token that would do the same thing, and we could reap all the profits of that and get all the information of that. You see, it's not only profits, but it's the information that's garnered by the people who are using these digital payment services. So if a bank, a financial institution can get rid of, say, Bitcoin, Ether, Monero, things like that, Tether, which I don't like Tether to begin with, but if it could, that opens the door for the financial institutions to come in and corner that entire vertical. All right, get rid of all competition. Section B of the Patriot Act, Section 3, Part B of the Patriot Act of the Restrict Act of Section 3, absolutely opens the door for that to happen. So what happens? And what's interesting is it says the catastrophic effects on the security or resilience of the critical infrastructure of the United States. So what is critical infrastructure? When I see those words, I think interstate highway, I think our water supply, our electric grid, our communication systems, things like that. But it doesn't say what that is. So that leaves a very broad interpretation as to what infrastructure actually is in the United States. Adding in where it says or digital economy, it is absolutely targeting the crypto vertical at that point. So you're looking at, can Bitcoin be viewed as damaging the digital economy of the United States? It absolutely can. As more and more people start to adopt crypto tokens, Bitcoin, Ether, things like that, it harms the United States dollar. It harms the digital economy of the United States. So can this be used to ban that? Yes, it can. Can it be used to prosecute people who use these tokens? Yes, it absolutely can. We have, so Bitcoin, every transaction on the Bitcoin ledger, the blockchain, is public. You can track everything across the board. But you have privacy tokens in crypto as well. You have things like Monero. So Monero has a blockchain, but it's anonymized. You can't see where any of those transactions are going, who's making money, who's sending money, who's getting paid, who's not getting paid. You can't see any of that. So what I would expect this bill, this restrict bill, to target is initially those privacy tokens. Now, granted, those privacy tokens are used by, a lot of them are used by criminals. A lot of them. There's a lot of criminal traffic that uses privacy tokens like Monero. But there's also legitimate people that are privacy conscious that use Monero as well. This will open up the door for those individuals to be prosecuted. There's no doubt about it. Goes on, Section 3, interfering in or altering the result or reported result of a federal election. Okay, so interfering in. Back when Trump was elected, we saw the Russian government put out a lot of different disinformation, use a lot of bots to try to manipulate the mindset of the United States populace toward voting toward President Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. Not that, I got to be honest with you, not that you needed a whole shitload of influence to not want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States. Nobody in their right mind wanted that bullshit. Nobody. And let's be honest, too, the refreshing thing about Donald Trump was that he basically said the shit that nobody else would say. We all knew that corruption was there. It's just Donald Trump was the first one that really stood a chance of becoming president that said that shit. And that resonated with a lot of people. It did. Yes, he's an asshole, but he still said the shit that nobody else would say. That don't mean I like him. I'm just saying that's what happened. So what this Restrict Act says is it says, hey, if there's a foreign adversary that's interfering in or trying to skew an election or change the results of election, it allows us to ban, prosecute, restrict that. But it goes a little bit further than that. It also says that, so one of the things that we see social media that's happening within social media platforms. It doesn't matter if it's TikTok, it doesn't matter if it's Facebook, Twitter, what have you. You take fake news, all right? And that fake news goes out, then somebody, an American citizen, reads the news and they think that bullshit's real. So they share it within their network, and then it goes viral from there. So it starts at a very small seed, but somewhere along the line, it goes viral. And American citizens, either educated about it, aware or unaware, or not educated, they use that and start to disseminate that to their networks, and it becomes viral over time. What the Restrict Act does is it allows those American citizens to be prosecuted for that. All right. Now, that's a problem. That's a problem because if you remember this thing during the pandemic, we had tech companies that were telling us what was right and what was not. They were restricting that free speech. Now, certainly they can do that. All right. But they were doing that. And they were, during the pandemic, we had both sides that were using the pandemic for their political ends. It became this thing that for some odd reason, we had things like masks, for example. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. I've had I've had 2 shots and a booster is what I've had. I'm done. I'm friggin' done with the boosters. But, we had both sides playing politics, and we weren't able to get a lot of truth about what was actually going on, or about how bad things were, or about what worked and what didn't. So we were told, wear a mask, a mask will protect you from everything, which turned out to be bullshit. A mask is fine if it's an N95 and is properly fitted, and an N95. But if it's not, it doesn't really do a whole shitload of stuff. Okay, it doesn't. Then we're told social distancing. We're told all this stuff, and at the end of the day, it's questionable how much was truly effective and how much was not. And a lot of doctors that were saying alternate things, they were not allowed to voice these alternate opinions, and they were banned, they were canceled, they were attacked, everything else across the board. And as truth comes out now, for example, the idea that the coronavirus started in a lab. The people back during the height of the pandemic that were saying that, they were typically banned on these social media platforms. Now it's coming out, it could have started in a lab. It could have very well started in a lab, but that because they were not allowed to voice these things, we were told what to think. I have a problem with that because I think the Restrict Act helps facilitate the punishment of these alternate views, because sometimes somebody repeats shit that just ain't right and they don't know any better. Sometimes they do know better and they're just, trying to skew stuff. I'm not quite sure that, they should be prosecuted for that, simply because, and the way the Restrict Act is written, if the Russian government or the Chinese government or whatever government puts this idea out there and then it's co-opted by unaware individuals, those unaware individuals can then be prosecuted for that as well, to the tune of 20 years in prison and up to $1 million fine. Absolutely am I against that. Section or Part D, coercive or criminal activities by a foreign adversary that are designed to undermine democratic processes and institutions or steer policy and regulatory decisions in favor of the strategic objectives of a foreign adversary. And it keeps going on, blah, blah, blah. So this is targeting China, without a doubt, to a lesser degree, Russia. China has problems with Taiwan. Now, here's the thing. I want to say it out of the gate. I am in support of Taiwan. I believe that Taiwan should be their own little people, being able to do whatever their own little actions want to do. You do you. I'm fine with that. Now, that being said, understand where the hell Taiwan is. Taiwan is 100 miles off the coast of mainland China. It is an island 295 miles wide. It is no small thing. It's right the shit there. Now, the United States is saying, we got to support Taiwan. Now, we're saying that now when for several years past, like Hollywood, for example, has been putting out dumbed-down bullshit blockbusters because they want to make sure they appeal to the Chinese mainland and get that $1 billion or billion people coming in watching the friggin' movies. So they've kept their mouths shut about Taiwan up until recently. It's all about the money at the end of the day. But I do remember that we have in the United States, we have this small island called Cuba. That's, I don't know if it's 60 or 90 miles off the coast of mainland United States, but It's about the same distance that Taiwan is from mainland China. And I will tell you that the United States government got all up in their shit when Russia wanted to put some missiles on mainland Cuba. They did not want that shit to happen, and World War III almost popped off about that. So what's the difference? So and we even have Guantanamo. We've got a base on Cuba. So, we kind of own Cuba. We kind of, we say Cuba, oh yeah, you guys can, oh yeah, you Cubans, yeah, you own yourselves. But in reality, we ain't going to let them do a damn thing that we don't want them to do. China with Taiwan is really no damn different than that. In reality, China ain't going to let Taiwan do one damn thing they don't want them to do. Seems we've got some dissonance, some cognitive dissonance at some sort of political level that doesn't remember our stance with Cuba. All right. We are all about getting in other people's shit in the United States. And I'm sure China is all about getting in other people's shit in China. Just saying, just throw that out there. What this is saying is that, hey, if somebody's putting out content that disagrees with the strategic policies of the United States or tries to veer away from that or steer that someplace else for the strategic policies of another country, we will come in and prosecute you. We can ban that. We can restrict that. So that's what all this says. This is this Restrict Act that we're talking about. It's more than just about websites. What strikes me as funny is that we are trying to ban TikTok. We have a problem with TikTok, yet iPhones are manufactured in China. Now, you've got that law in China that says, hey, we're allowed access to all the data. So what would prevent iPhones from being used to gather data as well? Or some sort of, hardware device, something installed on those devices as they're coming out of the factories that tracks more than what TikTok's able to track. We've seen that happen before. We've seen USB devices and everything's coming out that absolutely captures data and does this kind of stuff, or installs malware, things like that. I just don't really, I do understand. I do. The Restrict Act is overreaching. It's overly broad. While it is written, and here's the thing, as you read the Restrict Act, there are things that I absolutely think that we need to get rid of in the United States. TikTok is not on the top of the list. On the top of the list is Telegram for me, because Telegram is the platform that criminals gravitate to right now. It is something that does not answer to the United States subpoena request. Absolutely, the Restrict Act gives the federal government the ability and the authority to ban something like Telegram. It gives that authority to target criminal enterprises, nation-state attacks, things like that. But it is so broad, and the way the United States operates and has operated historically, it is so broad that you can bet your ass that it's going to be used to target things that are outside of that purview, normal, everyday people. For example, I'll be honest with you. Think about piracy for a second. Does the Restrict Act hit things like Pirate Bay? What's some other ones? Pirate Bay, Kick-Ass Torrents, RARBG, things like that. Does it target stuff like that? It absolutely does, because it damages the digital economy, and it also circumvents the way that businesses and websites are built to run. All right, it absolutely does that. So you can bet that people who use torrents download bullshit that they shouldn't be downloading, pirated movies and stuff like that. It's going to be used to hit you to the tune of 20 years in prison and up to $1 million fine. It's going to be used to gain access to these environments. So, any type of VPN or privacy browser that's capturing data, but they're deleting data or whatever, so you can't track who the users are. Federal government comes in and says, we want that, and they'll be handing that over, and then you'll be prosecuted for that. And I say that because, hey, I like, there are some things that you cannot get through any type of platform other than torrents right now. You can't get that. I'm a movie collector, so I have HD copies of Song of the South, because you can't get that shit through Disney. Disney's embarrassed by that. Why are they embarrassed by that? Well, they're embarrassed by that because it paints slavery as a happy go time. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay. So Disney tries to sweep that shit under the carpet. The film itself is a part of Disney history, and it's a good film. Unfortunately, it's a very good Disney film, even though Disney, oh man, did they fuck up on how they portrayed slavery. They certainly friggin' did. But Disney now is trying to sweep all that under the rug. They don't want to share that even on the Disney platform itself. Oh, no, we're not. We'll share everything else. We ain't going to share that. Heck no. As a matter of fact, we're going to tear down that Splash Mountain that's at Disney World. So we're going to try to forget all about this shit real quick. So there are things that there are reasons to have warrants and things like that out there. The Restrict Act targets stuff like that. It makes it easier for the federal government to prosecute users of it, to prosecute users of SOC 5 proxies, of VPNs, of spoofed phone calls. These things are not always illegal, but the way the federal government will look at it is they are now all illegal. So please bear that in mind. What I would urge everyone to do is to absolutely be against the Restrict Act. Contact your local representative, post about it on your social media platforms, share that information. It is not a good thing for the American people. We continue to have our liberties stripped away. All right. Those who would give up liberty or security in order to have liberty or privacy in order to have security deserve neither. I forgot how the quote actually goes, but that's what it is. My name is Brett Johnson, and I'm continually worried about where this country is headed. I truly am. That's one of the reasons I'm launching this other show in the next 6 weeks. I'm continually worried about the overreach of our government, about how our liberties are continually restricted, but I'm also worried about the mindset of society in general. You know, how things are just getting completely out of hand to the extremes on both sides, and how we can no longer seem to work together as a people. I would hope that we would come together and realize that this Restrict Act is certainly not beneficial to anyone but the politicians and those who are looking to take away our freedoms and our voices in the United States. My name is Brett Johnson. What do we say? We say stay safe, stay secure, and stay vigilant. More importantly, this is the Brett Johnson Show, and at the end of the day, just do the right damn thing. I'm Brett Johnson. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Until next time.